I was 69 years old, sitting alone at the defense table, with an empty chair beside me and a courtroom full of people who had already decided I was finished. The wood beneath my hands was cold. My fingers were folded so tightly together my knuckles had turned white, but I didn't loosen them. I didn't want anyone to see them shake. The room smelled like floor polish and old paper, the kind of smell that clings to places where decisions are made that change lives forever. Above me, the ceiling lights hummed softly, indifferent. Across the aisle, my son-in-law leaned back in his chair like he owned the place. Evan Walker. 37 years old. Tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, silk tie. The kind of man who wore confidence the way other people wore cologne, strong, overpowering, impossible to ignore. A gold watch caught the light on his wrist every time he moved, as if it needed to announce itself. He looked at me, then at the empty chair beside me, and laughed. Not a quiet laugh. Not a polite one. A sharp, mocking laugh that echoed just enough to turn heads. Still no lawyer, he said, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. What is it, Richard? Couldn't afford one? Or did they finally stop returning your calls? A few people chuckled. Someone behind him snorted. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the table, on a faint scratch in the wood that looked like a crooked lightning bolt. I traced it with my gaze, breathing slowly, carefully. I had learned a long time ago that reacting was exactly what men like Evan wanted. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Kind of sad, you know, he continued. A grown man, almost 70, and you can't even manage to hire an attorney. Guess all that hard work you used to brag about didn't really pay off. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. Beside him sat his attorney, a man named Gregory Hale. Mid-50s. Expensive navy suit. Silver-framed glasses perched on his nose. He flipped casually through a folder, completely relaxed, like this was just another routine win on his calendar. And on Evan's other side sat my daughter. Laura. 34 years old. Simple black dress. No jewelry except a thin silver necklace I recognized instantly. I'd given it to her on her 16th birthday. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed straight ahead. She did not look at me. That hurt more than Evan's words ever could. I remembered her as a little girl, running barefoot through the backyard, hair flying everywhere, laughing as I chased her with the garden hose. I remembered helping her with math homework at the kitchen table, the same table I still ate at alone now. I remembered promising her, after her mother died, that no matter what happened, I'd always be there. Now she sat next to the man trying to take everything from me, and she wouldn't even meet my eyes. All rise, the bailiff called. Everyone stood as the judge entered. The Honorable Margaret Ellis. Late 50s. Sharp eyes. No-nonsense posture. She took her seat and surveyed the room like she could already feel the tension hanging in the air. Be seated, she said. We sat. Case number 21 CV 1187, she began. Walker versus Thompson. That was me. Richard Thompson. Defendant. She glanced down at her papers, then up at me. Mr. Thompson, she said. I see that you are appearing without counsel. Are you expecting an attorney today? I stood slowly. My knees protested, but I ignored them. Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice came out rougher than I wanted. He's on his way. Evan laughed again. Oh, come on, he said, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. Your Honor, with all due respect, he's stalling. He doesn't have a lawyer. He's just trying to delay the inevitable. Judge Ellis's gaze snapped to him. Mr. Walker, she said sharply, you will speak when addressed by the court. Evan raised his hands in mock surrender. Of course. My apologies. But his grin never faded. The judge turned back to me. Mr. Thompson, she said, court time is valuable. If you do not have representation, we can proceed, but I need to be clear on your intentions. I swallowed. He's coming, I said. He called last night. He said he'd be here. Evan leaned back, crossing his arms. Sure he did, he muttered. Let me guess. Some miracle lawyer flying in to save the day? I felt heat rise to my face, but I kept my eyes on the judge. Please, I said quietly. Just a few minutes. Judge Ellis sighed. She tapped her pen against the bench, once, twice. Mr. Thompson, she said, I'm willing to allow a brief delay. 5 minutes. If your attorney does not arrive by then, we will proceed. My heart pounded. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. 5 minutes. Evan glanced at his watch, then looked at me with open amusement. Better hope traffic's light, he said. I sat back down, hands clasped so tightly they ached. I stared at the courtroom doors, willing them to open, counting each second in my head. 1 minute passed. 2. Gregory Hale whispered something to Evan, and they both smiled. Laura shifted in her seat, just slightly. For a moment, I thought she might look at me. She didn't. 3 minutes. My throat felt dry. My palms were slick with sweat. 4 minutes. Judge Ellis picked up her gavel. Mr. Thompson, she began, it appears. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Not just the doors, but the footsteps that followed. Slow. Steady. Deliberate. Each step echoing against the marble floor, unhurried, confident. Every head in the courtroom turned. A man stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark gray suit that fit him like it had been tailored for this exact moment. His hair was silver, neatly combed back. His eyes were sharp, focused, taking in the room in a single glance. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He walked forward like he belonged there. Behind him followed 2 younger men, both in suits, carrying briefcases, their expressions serious. The courtroom went silent. Gregory Hale's smile vanished. Evan frowned, leaning forward. Who the hell is that? He whispered. The man reached the defense table and set his briefcase down gently. He pulled out a card and handed it to the bailiff, then turned to face the bench. Your Honor, he said, his voice calm but commanding. My name is Daniel Crow. I apologize for the delay. I am entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant, Mr. Richard Thompson. A murmur rippled through the room. Judge Ellis examined the card, then looked up at him. Mr. Crow, she said, you're cutting it close. My apologies, Daniel replied. Travel was complicated. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, she said. Please take your seat. Daniel sat beside me. For the first time that morning, I felt like I could breathe. Evan stared at him, suspicion etched across his face. Wait, he said under his breath. Crow? As in? Daniel turned his head slightly and looked directly at Evan. They locked eyes. Something shifted. The color drained from Evan's face so fast it was almost startling. His confident posture stiffened, his jaw tightening as if he were trying to swallow something he couldn't. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't say a word. He just looked at him long enough to let the recognition settle in. Then he turned back to the judge. Your Honor, Daniel said, standing smoothly. If the court permits, I'd like to begin by addressing the alleged power of attorney document that forms the basis of the plaintiff's claim. Judge Ellis raised an eyebrow. You may proceed, she said. Daniel opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This document, he said, holding it up, purports to grant Mr. Walker authority over Mr. Thompson's financial assets. It bears what is claimed to be Mr. Thompson's signature. He placed it on the bench. However, he continued, this signature has been analyzed by multiple forensic handwriting experts. All have concluded it is not authentic. Gregory Hale shot to his feet. Objection, he said. This is highly irregular. We haven't had time to review. Sit down, Judge Ellis snapped. You'll have your opportunity. Gregory sat, his face tight. Daniel continued. Over the past 6 months, my client's bank accounts were frozen. His access to his own funds was revoked. He was left unable to pay bills, cover medical expenses, or hire legal counsel. All of this was done under the authority of this forged document. I watched Evan's hands clench. Daniel turned slightly, addressing the room. Mr. Walker did not merely exploit a legal loophole, he said. He orchestrated a deliberate campaign of financial control and isolation against an elderly man who trusted him. Evan stood abruptly. That's not true, he snapped. He agreed to everything. He knew exactly what he was signing. Judge Ellis slammed her gavel. Mr. Walker, she said, you will sit down and let your attorney speak for you. Evan sat, breathing hard. Daniel didn't even look at him. In addition, Daniel said, we will demonstrate that Mr. Walker systematically interfered with communication between Mr. Thompson and his daughter. Laura's head snapped up. Daniel turned to her, his voice gentle. Ms. Walker, he said, do you recall receiving messages from your father over the past year? Laura hesitated. No, she said quietly. He stopped reaching out. Daniel nodded. May I submit Exhibit B? He asked. Judge Ellis nodded. One of the younger men stepped forward, handing Daniel a tablet. He tapped the screen, then turned it toward the bench. These messages, Daniel said, were recovered from cloud backups associated with Ms. Walker's phone. Messages sent by Mr. Thompson that were never delivered. He read one aloud. Laura, I'm worried about you. Please call me. I love you. Dad. A sharp intake of breath came from Laura. Tears filled her eyes. Daniel continued, reading several more. Ms. Walker never saw these messages, he said. Because Mr. Walker installed monitoring software on her phone without her knowledge. He intercepted calls, deleted texts, and controlled the narrative. Evan jumped to his feet again. You're lying, he shouted. She chose not to talk to him. He's manipulative. Enough, Judge Ellis said. Sit down. Evan sat, his face red. Daniel turned back to the bench. Your Honor, he said, this case is not about a family disagreement. It is about exploitation. And I intend to prove it fully. He paused. I would like to call the plaintiff, Mr. Evan Walker, to the stand. The courtroom buzzed. Evan stood slowly, his confidence visibly shaken. He walked to the stand and was sworn in, his movements stiff. Daniel approached him calmly. Mr. Walker, he began, when did you first begin managing Mr. Thompson's finances? About a year ago, Evan said. He asked me to help. And when did you begin transferring funds from his accounts? Evan hesitated. I didn't transfer anything improperly. Daniel nodded. Then you won't mind explaining why $8 million was transferred to an offshore account registered in your name. Evan's mouth opened. Closed. That was estate planning, he said weakly. Estate planning, Daniel repeated. For a man who is still alive, mentally competent, and unaware of the transfer? Silence. Judge Ellis leaned forward. Answer the question, she said. Evan swallowed. I needed liquidity, he muttered. For what? Daniel asked. Another pause. For debts, Evan said quietly. Daniel nodded. Gambling debts, he asked. Evan looked up sharply. Daniel held up another document. $2.1 million owed to a private lender, he said. With interest compounding weekly. Evan's shoulders slumped. Daniel stepped back. No further questions, he said. Gregory Hale stood. Your Honor, he said, voice strained, I must withdraw as counsel due to an unforeseen conflict. Judge Ellis studied him. Granted, she said. Gregory gathered his things and left without looking at Evan. Evan sat alone. The rest unfolded quickly. Assets frozen. Accounts restored. Criminal charges referred. When the verdict was read, I felt something lift from my chest that I hadn't realized had been crushing me for months. Evan was led away in handcuffs, his head down. Laura stood hesitantly, then walked toward me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I held her the way I used to when she was little. Daniel watched quietly from a distance. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was my own again. And I learned something important that day. Never mistake silence for weakness. And never assume the man sitting alone has no one left to stand for him. We stood there for a moment in the hallway outside the courtroom, my daughter clinging to me like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, the kind that come after a long-held life finally collapses. "I didn't know," she kept whispering. "I swear I didn't know." "I know," I said softly, rubbing her back the way I used to when she was small. "I know." Behind us, the heavy courtroom doors closed with a dull thud. Evan was gone. The man who had walked in so sure of himself, so convinced he had already won, had been let out in handcuffs without a single person standing beside him. Daniel Crowe stepped out a moment later, adjusting his cuffs as if this had been just another day at the office. But when he looked at me, his expression softened. "You all right, Richard?" he asked. I nodded. My throat was too tight to say much else. He gave a small, approving nod. "Good. Take your daughter home." Today was a lot. Laura pulled back slightly and looked at him, really looked at him, like she was seeing him for the first time. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky. "For everything." Daniel inclined his head. "You're welcome. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you were put in the middle of this." She nodded, then turned back to me. As we walked out of the courthouse together, the air outside felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. Like the world had exhaled. The weeks that followed were quiet. Too quiet at first. The house felt strange with Laura staying in the guest room again, like time had folded in on itself. We cooked together, ate dinner at the same table we once did every night. Some conversations were easy. Others were hard. But we talked. Really talked. About what Evan had told her. About the messages she never saw. About the nights I sat alone wondering how I'd lost my own child without even realizing it. There were tears. There were apologies. There was forgiveness, slowly, carefully rebuilt. Daniel kept his word. He checked in regularly, handling the paperwork, untangling the mess Evan had left behind. The accounts were restored. The house was officially, legally mine again. Every document stamped and filed. One afternoon, he stopped by in person. He stood in my living room, looking around at the photos on the walls. My late wife. Laura as a child. Family vacations frozen in time. "You built a good life here," he said quietly. "I thought I'd lose it," I admitted. He shook his head. "Not on my watch." We sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming between us. For the first time, he told me why he'd come. "When I got your call," he said, staring into his cup, "I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't care. Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Of realizing how close you were to losing everything," he said. "Of knowing I could have missed it." I nodded slowly. "You didn't," I said. "That's what matters." He smiled faintly. A month later, the news came quietly. Evan had been formally charged. Fraud. Forgery. Elder abuse. Financial exploitation. The list was long. Laura didn't say much when she heard. She just nodded, like she'd already made peace with the truth. "I loved who I thought he was," she said one night. Not who he actually was. That understanding, painful as it was, set her free. Winter arrived early that year. On the first snowfall, Laura stood by the window, watching the flakes drift down, just like her mother used to. She smiled softly, a real smile this time. Feels like a fresh start, she said. It is, I replied. There was a knock at the door. Daniel stood outside, holding a small paper bag. Brought pastries, he said. Thought I'd join you for a minute. We sat together, three people bound not by blood, but by something just as strong. Trust. Choice. Standing up when it mattered. As the snow fell, I thought back to that courtroom. To the empty chair. To the laughter. To the moment everything changed. I had walked in feeling invisible. I walked out knowing something I'd forgotten for a long time. Even when you stand alone, you're never as powerless as they want you to believe. Sometimes, all it takes is one person walking through the door to remind the world who you really are. Life didn't magically become perfect after that, but it became honest. And that made all the difference. A few weeks after the snowfall, Laura moved into her own apartment across town. Not because she wanted distance from me, but because she wanted something she hadn't had in a long time, control over her own life. We helped each other pack. Old boxes. Old memories. Some we laughed over. Some we cried through. Before she left, she hugged me tightly in the doorway. I'm not disappearing again, she said firmly. I promise. I believed her. We talked every Sunday after that. Sometimes more. Sometimes just about nothing, what she cooked, a class she was taking, a book she was reading. Ordinary things. The kind of conversations I used to think were guaranteed, until I learned they weren't. Daniel and I stayed in touch too. He'd stop by occasionally, always unannounced, usually with coffee. We'd sit at the kitchen table, the same one Evan once leaned against, smiling as he talked about family. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. You know, Daniel said one afternoon, stirring his coffee, I've been doing this a long time. Courtrooms, contracts, people at their worst. But cases like yours, they stay with you. Why? I asked. Because you didn't become bitter, he said. You could have. Most people do. I shrugged. I didn't have the energy for it. He smiled. That might be strength, not weakness. The trial itself was mercifully short. Evan pleaded not guilty at first. Claimed misunderstanding. Claimed stress. Claimed love. None of it held up. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge didn't raise her voice when she sentenced him. She didn't need to. 7 years. When I heard the number, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt something quieter. Final. Laura didn't attend the sentencing. She asked me if I was going. I think I need to, I told her. She nodded. Then I think I don't. We respected each other's choices. On the day Evan was taken away, he looked at me once. Really looked at me. Not with anger. Not with arrogance. With fear. And for the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Spring came slowly that year. The garden in the backyard had been neglected during everything that happened. Weeds had taken over. The soil was dry, cracked. One morning, I went outside with gloves and a shovel and started pulling them out, one by one. It took hours. My back ached. My hands were sore. But by the end of the day, the earth was ready again. Laura came over the next weekend with seedlings. Mom would have liked these, she said, handing me a small tray. We planted them together. As the weeks passed, green pushed through the soil. Tomatoes. Herbs. Flowers. Proof that even ground left unattended could still grow something good. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Laura spoke quietly. I used to think strength was loud, she said. Like Evan. Like always having the last word. I looked at her. What do you think now? She smiled faintly. I think it's what you did. Staying calm. Waiting. Trusting yourself when everyone else doubted you. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Months later, on my 70th birthday, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stood there, holding a small wrapped box. "Hope I'm not late," he said. "Perfect timing," I replied. Inside the box was a simple fountain pen. Elegant. Heavy in my hand. "For signing things that matter," he said. I understood. That night, after the cake was eaten and the house was quiet again, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Not legal documents. Not defenses. Letters. To my daughter. To my late wife. To myself. I wrote about the courtroom. About the laughter. About the moment the doors opened. And I realized something then, something I wished I'd known sooner. Power doesn't always look like confidence or wealth or noise. Sometimes, it looks like patience. Sometimes, it looks like an empty chair and the courage to wait. And sometimes, when the moment is right, it looks like a man walking through a door and reminding everyone, including you, that your story isn't over yet. The letters became a habit after that. Every morning, just after sunrise, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and wrote for half an hour. Sometimes it was memories. Sometimes it was things I never said out loud. Regrets. Gratitude. Questions with no answers. I didn't write because anyone would read them. I wrote because for the first time in a long while, I felt heard even if only by myself. Laura noticed the change before I did. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon when she stopped by. Like something finally settled. "Maybe it did," I replied. She smiled. "I'm glad." Life moved forward in small, steady ways. Laura started therapy. She painted again, filling her apartment with color. She laughed more. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't sound like it's trying to convince anyone. Daniel remained a quiet presence. Not hovering. Not heroic. Just there when needed. One evening, as we walked along the sidewalk near my house, he said something that stayed with me. "People think justice is loud," he said. "That it always looks like a verdict or a sentence. But most of the time, it's quieter than that." "What does it look like then?" I asked. "Peace," he said simply. That word felt right. On the anniversary of the trial, I went back to the courthouse alone. I didn't go inside. I just stood across the street for a moment, watching people come and go. Some hopeful. Some terrified. Some angry. Some already defeated. I thought of the man I'd been that morning. Sitting alone. Mocked. Dismissed. Certain I was about to lose everything. And I wished I could tell him something. I wished I could tell him that silence is not surrender. That waiting is not weakness. That even when the room laughs at you, the story is not finished. That sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do, is hold your ground. I turned and walked away, feeling the sun on my face. At home, Laura was already there, watering the plants in the garden. She looked up when she saw me. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Hey, sweetheart." We stood there together, watching the leaves move gently in the breeze. For a long time, I thought the worst thing that ever happened to me was being betrayed by my own family. Now I understand something different. The worst thing would have been giving up before the truth had a chance to arrive. Because it always does. Maybe not loudly. Maybe not quickly. But right on time. And when it does, it doesn't just change the courtroom. It changes everything. Years pass quietly when you finally stop bracing for impact. I didn't notice at first. One day blended into the next. Morning light through the kitchen window. The kettle whistling. The familiar creak of the floorboard near the hallway. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary peace. The kind of peace I once took for granted, then feared I'd never feel again. Laura started bringing friends over. Real friends. People who laughed easily, who asked questions, who looked me in the eye when they spoke. One afternoon, as I watched her move around the kitchen, confident and relaxed, I realized something with a strange mix of relief and sadness. She was no longer the girl who needed protecting. She was becoming the woman she'd been denied the chance to be. And that was okay. Daniel stopped by less often, but when he did, it felt intentional. We never talked about Evan anymore. Not because we were avoiding it, but because there was nothing left to say. The man had become a closed chapter. A lesson learned. A door locked for good. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky darken, Daniel broke the silence. "You know," he said, "when I walked into that courtroom, everyone thought I was the story." I chuckled softly. "Weren't you?" He shook his head. "No. I was just the interruption. You were the story." I frowned. "I didn't do anything." "That's not true," he said. "You trusted yourself when it mattered. You waited instead of folding. Most people panic. You didn't." I thought back to that empty chair. The laughter. The clock ticking down. I was terrified, I admitted. He smiled. Courage usually is. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room, the house quiet around me. I looked at the photograph of my wife on the mantel. Her smile was frozen in time, warm and knowing. "I think you'd be proud of her," I said aloud. "And maybe, of me too." The room didn't answer. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty either. On my 72nd birthday, Laura surprised me with a small gathering in the backyard. Nothing fancy. Just a few chairs, some food, soft music playing from a speaker. Neighbors. Friends. People who knew my name, not my court case. As the sun dipped low, Laura raised a glass. "To my dad," she said, her voice steady. "For teaching me that strength doesn't shout. It waits." I felt my eyes burn. Later that night, as everyone left and the house settled back into silence, I walked into the garden. The plants were tall now. Healthy. Alive. I ran my hand along a tomato vine, feeling the rough leaves beneath my fingers. It struck me then how close I'd come to losing all of this. Not just the house. The mornings. The conversations. The chance to grow old with dignity. And all because someone mistook my quiet for weakness. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table one last time that night. I picked up my pen and wrote a final letter. Not to anyone specific. Just the truth. That life will test you when you're tired. That betrayal often wears the face of family. That the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. And that sometimes, the man who says nothing, is the one about to change everything. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the drawer. Outside, the night was calm. And for the first time in my life, so was I. The house was quiet when I finally turned off the lights. I stood for a moment in the hallway, listening to the soft tick of the clock on the wall, the steady rhythm of time moving forward whether we're ready or not. I thought about how close I had come to losing all of this, not just the walls and the land, but the life inside it. I thought about that courtroom again. The laughter. The empty chair. The way people looked at me like I was already finished. And I smiled. Because they were wrong. I went to bed that night with a feeling I hadn't known in years. Not relief. Not victory. Peace. If there's one thing my story taught me, it's this: never assume the quiet man has nothing left. Never mistake patience for surrender. And never believe that just because someone stands alone, they are powerless. Sometimes, the strongest move you can make is to wait. To hold your ground. To trust that the truth has a way of walking through the door right when it's needed most. And when it does, it doesn't just change the outcome. It changes your life. I closed my eyes, knowing that no matter what came next, I would face it standing tall. Because I had learned who I was. And I would never forget it again.